My name is Sean Buckelew, and I'm a freelance animator, filmmaker, dude. I suppose that you're not on contract full-time with any given studio. You're not a full-time employee. You work more like as a contractor, and you just get booked by different places or just get approached by companies to direct or animate little animated pieces. So the schedule is different. You're never at a place for more than a couple months usually. So it's just a different lifestyle, I guess. And I guess it also maybe allows you to jump between different types of projects kind of more frequently, as opposed to being like an employee at a feature animation studio. You're probably mostly going to be working on feature animation. I like to work independently as opposed to a studio just because it allows for, I think, it allows for more balance with a personal practice, personal filmmaking practice, where if you want to pursue your own projects, you have these kind of gaps in time where you're between projects, and working freelance allows for that. But also it's a lot of just random kind of circumstance of what kinds of projects like come your way. And so part of it's also just I made certain kinds of projects, and then certain kinds of work was just offered to me, and it's kind of just been this like, it's like how much kind of actual agency do you have exactly in the kind of crafting of your career. So I also feel like I kind of just fell into it because it was like I did this thing which opens up these other gigs, and then I get into a balance of working this way, and it just feels comfortable and I enjoy the balance. But it's not like I'm diametrically or philosophically opposed to the other. It's just sort of what I ended up doing. I do animation instead of live action specifically. I mean, that comes up a lot just because I feel like there's films of mine that I've made that have nothing in them that like needs to be animated. So it's kind of like, well, why didn't you just make it live action? And I think it's I don't know. I mean, it's kind of almost related to the question of like, why do you decide your career? It's kind of like, I don't know, because I like to draw and I like movies, and it's like, so it makes sense. I think on a bigger level, it's like I like crafting something just by myself, or the idea of like there are limitations with animation, like it takes a long time, but it's not the same limitations as film, where like if I wanted to do a scene that's in a giant ballroom with like 20 people, in live action that just would be a huge effort. And maybe it all ends up being kind of equal in the end, where it's like it's a huge effort, but you can film it all in a day, as opposed to me working alone. I don't need to have anyone else, but it takes me a year to do that sequence. But I don't know, it's just like I enjoy the craft of it, and it just makes sense to me. And it's almost just like it's the way that I think, where I just don't conceptualize things in terms of live action. And I don't know, I also, you know, it's like, why draw when you can take a photograph? And it's like, well, because drawings are just different feeling, you know. They convey something different, and I'm more interested in that than photography. The hardest thing about animating is definitely there's like a kind of high craft threshold, maybe, where if you have a camera and you point it at a person, you're already sort of in the ballpark of normal movies. I feel like with animation, it's like the stuff that you see in a theater and what you can kind of personally do, there's such a divide that it can sometimes feel like, I don't know, you just have to, like, to get a character to walk from one side of the screen to the other, it takes like years of practice. Just from a craft animation standpoint, on top of like then telling a compelling story. I think animation feels like every bit of it is like labor. I've been really fortunate in finding a balance that where it's like this thing with when you're working freelance, right? Where it always feels a little bit precarious, especially at first. We were kind of like, okay, I got this job, but what if after this the phone doesn't ring for, you know, 6 months? Then I'm in trouble. And so I feel like I've been lucky that opportunities have presented themselves frequently enough that I haven't been like, I'm screwed, you know, this isn't working, I need to get a normal job yet. We'll see.
Uh-huh. Oh, seriously though. Let's talk Jennings'
Yeah.
account.
So the Jennings account was actually a class assignment. that was for this course in my first year at CalArts called Drawn Techniques, that was taught by this animator, Maureen Selwood. It was like we played a game of badminton. It was like, respond to this with a drawn animation. When I first got to CalArts, there was this thing where a bunch of people kept telling me I was too tight. They were like, you're too tight, you need to loosen up. You need to have fun, you need to loosen up. And I kind of like, just like, I didn't like it. Like, I don't know. I was like, I'm fine. For that one, I was like, all right, you want me to loosen up? I'm gonna get loose. And so I did a thing where it was like, every shot was just straight ahead animated with ink on paper, and I would just try to do, you know, it would be like, I'm gonna do 100 drawings, just da-da-da-da, flip, da-da-da, flip, and just try to have it be like the loosest thing I can possibly make. I wanna kind of do this more like intuitive, loose writing, but also I'm gonna make it this robot voice just because, for a practical reason, because it let me just type text into the computer. And so when I was writing it, it was like I was writing it kind of live in the voice, and that was really fun. But I also just thought it was funny. I don't know, it was just a joke.
You think you look at the sky and say, I'm here. I've returned. I've found my way back. My life belongs to me again.
So when I was doing Jennings' account, I was also working on developing the kind of concept of Hopkins and Delaney, which was like the first year short at CalArts. We were supposed to make a short in your first year. I had read this book called The Pale King by David Foster Wallace, which was all about the IRS, and I really, really liked it. It was like my favorite book. I was working doing data entry in an accounting department at this great company that did graphic design and like motion graphics for lawyers to present in court. Like, we interacted with lawyers a lot. And I was like entering in like expense reports and like receipts and stuff. And I loved it. It was such a fun job. I felt like it was like the ultimate job that most people would describe as just this mindless thing. But I don't know, I got to like, I got to look at this play-by-play of what like people did, like just based on their receipts. You got to kind of vicariously live through what these people were doing when they were out of town. It was so fun. And like also you're at a computer and you have access to the internet, like you can do anything, you know, you can look up anything. If you're bored, it's your own fault.
Let me tell you, a friend of mine had a lot of success with this modafinil.
In Jennings' account, right, it's this kind of like, this guy who wants to give this younger guy advice, but then when he gets beat in badminton, he's like all petty and pissed off. And then in Hopkins and Delaney, I felt like I just wanted there to be this kind of more swirling effect, but there's still kind of that character of like a guy who's really like burning himself out and like burning the midnight oil. It's almost like in response to a trope where you see like a sea of desks, and there are all these drones and they're just doing this work, and I don't, you know, it's all just mindless. And it's like, I don't know, I kind of do care what the work is. You know, like, what is the work? I'm dying to know. You know, what are they doing at midnight when they're stuck in the office? Because I'm sure they're not working, you know, which then kind of led to this whole other thing, which was in Hopkins, this kind of revelation was like the sort of like the way it was being constructed had a kind of like, I was trying to make it kind of realistic in certain ways. Like, the nuances of like, what's the difference between someone who has a BlackBerry or an iPhone or whatever, you know, and like, what's the difference between someone who drinks Dad's root beer versus Bark's root beer? It became this like almost like punchline of like hyper specificity.
Hello? Hey, no.
In Hopkins and Delaney, there was this decision that got made where the movie took place on the day I started the first shot, which is kind of arbitrary, but it's like the date in the movie is in 2012, which happened to be the day that production started, like officially. And then it was released in 2014. And so there was a thing with that of like, the difference between 2012 and 2014 is basically nothing, right? But technologically, it's like night and day. You know, so much changed between, like, just even like the depiction of certain design interfaces for websites, right? Like Twitter changed, Facebook changed, the way it looked, the way it functioned changed. And so even within Hopkins and Delaney, which was sort of contemporary, there was this little delay that by the end I was doing these retro screen interfaces, which kind of triggered an idea. And then I started developing this other film as my CalArts thesis called Data Streams, which was set in 2006. In 2003, 2013 when I started working on data streams, the difference between 2013 and 2006 was also kind of like, 2000 stuff from 2006 basically feels like contemporary. If you watch Children of Men, it feels like a new contemporary movie, as opposed to like if you watch, I don't know, something from the late 90s where you go like, okay, this officially is like a dated looking and feeling thing. You'd have people looking at like LiveJournal and MySpace. And so then it kind of led to an interest in like politically what changed in the kind of internet landscape. I thought that stuff was interesting and kind of wanted to try to unpack it in this kind of like emotional, character-driven narrative. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna pivot, but still kind of keep some of that stuff, but I'm gonna make sort of a prequel to that that's even earlier, that's in 2002, and kind of trying to address the same thing of like, yeah, what was the kind of emotional content of being on the internet in 2002? This was kind of in an era where I felt like there was a lot of like, being anonymous online is toxic and boy, people are awful to each other. And thinking about kind of 2002 where it was like, yeah, I don't know, there's a little bit of a flip side to that, which was, being kind of playful with your identity in these kind of early internet spaces. It allowed for that, I think, to manifest differently, where it was like everyone knew the internet was like the Wild West, but there were also these kind of safe emotional spaces or relationships with someone who you would never go like, let's meet up, or like friend me on Facebook. It was like, I'll never know you, I'll never really know who you are, but we have such an intense connection because it's this really intimate setting. So I wanted to do it about that, but kind of give it the data streams, Hopkins and Delaney treatment, where it's like, also it's really, really specific. You see a lot of people that are maybe drawn towards the one side because it's just bigger, and they make big movies that are fun and great to watch. And I think that there can be a feeling of like, oh, I want to like denigrate that other side to kind of lift up this other thing as being cooler. And I sort of like, I almost would want to show them stuff that I'm excited about and try to like make that be a contagious thing, And I think that in terms of picking a career path, I don't know. It's like I think you should pursue your own interests over what do I need to do to get accepted into this world, Which I think like in the big studio world, there's a feeling of like, well, how can I make a short that would kind of like make me like well suited for like a job at such and such a place because it's of a similar sensibility. It's like that seems like it'll just make making stuff harder because you're like being self-conscious, as opposed to let me really think about what I'm interested in and then just pursue that as an animation filmmaker, and it'll be just easier and I'll like it more and I'll be more proud of it. And I don't know exactly where it'll lead me. It might lead me to freelance opportunities where I get to keep doing things I'm interested in. Might lead to a job at Cartoon Network or Pixar because that's where my sensibilities align, but like just allowing yourself to be yourself and letting your filmmaking practice maybe be like an extension of just, stuff you're interested in or who you are even,